In 2016, Rotting Christ unleashed Rituals onto the world, and this album, which they were able to make with the help of a number of guests, was one that felt a little bit darker by comparison to some of those they had unleashed upon the world over the recent memory, maybe going back as far as 2006 or so. It wasn't that Rotting Christ was a group that was necessarily on the decline or really even slowing down. This was one that, with the collaborative efforts that they were able to have with some of these guest musicians, not to mention their own writing prowess, was able to unleash something onto the world that took it completely by surprise. We knew Rotting Christ was a capable band, but we didn't really know if they were still capable of making an album such as what we got with Rituals. Now, 3 years later, we have Heretics, and this is one where there's sort of a little bit of that old school expectation that's attached to it. Instead of just wanting a solid album from this group, we now want to have a disc that's able to really be on parallel or on par with what we got with Rituals. They basically gave themselves something to shoot for, something to aspire for, and the fans gave themselves something to hope for. And so whenever this album dropped just last Friday, it was something that had all of those expectations wrapped within it. Was it able to deliver that? Well, yes and no, and we're going to discuss this just for a little while. The first thing that you have to understand about the Heretics is that this is an album that, while it does have some similar sound as you were able to receive with Rituals, is not trying to be the exact same style of album. It's not attempting to be Rituals Part 2 insofar as it's trying to just copy-paste the musical traditions. This is one that's made primarily with just the band itself, and instead is trying to utilize some of the elements of their past work in order to try to craft something a little bit new here in the present. So you're going to hear a couple of, riff patterns, either that or ideas that sound similar to things that perhaps you've heard 15 or 16 years ago. Tracks such as 666 come to mind. But whenever you enter into In the Name of God, and really just going through the first half of this album, you really start to see some of what this album is all about. There is lyricism on here that is delivered with an absolute fury and with a tongue that's definitely silver as shit. This is one that definitely does not screw around. But it is also one that is rife with a lot of just spoken word or a lot of chants or really just blasphemy. And this is something that the name The Heretics would obviously inspire, or you would almost expect that from an album with such a title, but not something that you traditionally see or hear in this case with such abundance. And it's something where they are going with some old Edgar Allan Poe poetry and really just some other very darker, more sinister traditions in order to add a little bit more flavor to what this album is able to really deliver. But does it do that? With Heaven, Hell, and Fire, I would say it absolutely does. This is a near 5-minute long cut that seems to have that old luster that Rotting Christ had and was shifting so well, really all sort of draped all over it. The one thing that was curious about Rituals was that it was different, and as a result you could compare it to past works, but you had to look at it overall as a very independent entity. With this album, you're looking at albums such as A Dead Poem, or going even further back in Rotting Christ's chronology, in order to find little similarities here and there, in order to sort of amplify or give a little bit more of a similar feel, that simulacrum feel to some of these songs. And as a result, between that and the abundance of spoken word on this disc, it's one that doesn't necessarily feel like it had the paramount focus that Rituals possessed. Still a very good album. However, going into Desiree and I Believe, Fire, God, and Fear, it seems like whenever they have three words that are somewhat independent and only, separated through comma or the word and, that Rotting Christ on this album just really seemed to deliver, because both Heaven and Hell and Fire, God, and Fear both feel like they have a lot of strength that's trapped sort of right there within. Like, that's where the magic really came from. And even whenever you get into the New Messiah and the Voice of Universe, there is still a lot of that fixation. It's something that still feels very big in your face, and Rotting Christ still feels like the band that did just deliver what some could call a classic, whereas others called it shit. I don't know. Rituals divided more people than I actually thought whenever I was looking into the fallout of that album 3 years later. I was honestly quite surprised. But at the same time, where I think Rotting Christ came up just a little bit short with the Heretics was just in overall content. They were trying to build that eerie atmosphere, and they were able to check off that box. They were trying to give this a very blasphemous feel. They were able to check off that box. But whenever it came to doing something that felt like it had a real big overall theme to it, and one that had sort of the density and the sort of the layering that was given to us with an album such as Rituals, this is one that just doesn't quite match up to that, and that's perhaps by design. But even by design, the material that we have encased here feels like it is a nice tribute to what Rotting Christ has been able to do throughout their career, but they're not bringing that much brand new to the curve, and that's kind of where the some of the higher marks that this album could have received start to become a little bit lower. It's something that just felt a little bit too traditional. It felt a little bit too much as to what we were expecting perhaps 5 or 6 years ago from the band, as opposed to perhaps what we were to come to expect here in 2019. And it's also a group that feels like its age is starting to display itself a little bit, because some of the decision making does feel a bit rocky, almost as though they were trying to overall breed that sort of contempt, breed that blasphemy, and breed that sacrilege, but only came off as somewhat beyond hokey, not so much going in the full territory of feeling just really try hard, but instead not really also feeling like they delivered the goods 100%. Perhaps this is a pattern of aging from this style of music, where that art of adversary is not 100% as it felt like it was 3 years ago or even 13 years ago. Or perhaps it's just the fact that this album didn't feel like it brought that with perhaps the same vigor and the same intensity that we heard 3 years ago or that we heard 13 years ago. But overall, this is still a decent album. This is one that has great ideas, great riffing, and the overall flow of it does not get disturbed. It's something that does, some of the things that are considered weaknesses enough times where it doesn't feel like it's a one-off disappointment. It instead feels like it's just a curious theme that perhaps over multiple listens you grow to really appreciate. And that's kind of what happened upon subsequent listens after the first for me. I started to really grow to appreciate some of these spoken word elements, or some of these less lyrically based portions of the Heretics, considering it made me feel like you were in the midst of somebody who was stark raving mad and trying their best to proclaim the dark ministries. And as a result, that atmosphere and overall feeling definitely boosted this album a little bit after the first listen. It's still a 23 out of 30. It's still an album that I feel is still missing just a little bit of that magic that perhaps captivated us so very much, not only with Rituals, but with albums by Rotting Christ in the past. But this is still a disc that, if you're a fan, is very much worth exploring, and the band still continues to deliver a lot of energy, and that's very, very important, considering that energy is very infectious. That energy can sometimes catapult you to new heights. But I want to know what you think about the Rituals from Rotting Christ. Please let me know in the comments below. My name is coverkillernation. We have merch available. We have CDs for sale. All sorts of different things that you can find in the description box below, so please investigate that also. And I will talk to you guys and ladies all next time. Take care.